The stars stretched forever in the silence of space, cold and endless, hiding secrets older than time itself. And for as long as anyone could remember, the ancient ones had remained only a legend, spoken of in hushed tones and careful whispers by explorers, traders, and scholars across the galactic concord. Their ruins scattered through forgotten systems, their technology too advanced to understand, and their language lost in the void, feared not for what they did, but for what they left behind, warnings etched in stone. Energy pulses, locked in repeat, in vast temples sealed under alien skies. And while most heeded the unspoken rule to leave the ancients alone, one Solari scientist, Kirel Valen, was not like the others, for she believed knowledge was more important than fear. And when her deep space probe returned from the restricted Morse system with data of a strange, steady pulse beneath the crust of a red-banded moon, she knew she had found something special, something old, something alive, and against her government's cautious advice, she assembled a small team of specialists, a quiet Zaran pilot named Tech, a curious young android named Nilo, and a seasoned ruin diver from the Rimworlds named Captain Mara Tess, who had seen more death traps than she cared to admit, and together, they entered the forgotten system aboard Kiril's ship Asterisk, the Radiant. Dust Asterisk, its hull coated in scanner silencing mesh, its crew full of nerves, and its course set toward the forbidden planet simply known in the old charts as Eos 9, where no one had dared land for 500 years. And as they descended into the orange clouded skies, strange static crawled through their systems. Distant signals bounced off unknown sources, and the planet seemed to hum with a presence that none of them could explain, not even Nilo, who processed data faster than thought. And when they finally touched down on the cracked obsidian plain near what looked like a half-buried spire, shaped like a spiral blade of crystal, there was an unnatural stillness in the air. No wind, no sound, only the faint vibration beneath their boots, as if something deep below still breathed. Ken Kirel, heart pounding, scanned the area and found each an entrance hidden beneath layers of reflective dust, locked by an energy code that matched nothing in the current galaxy, yet somehow responded to the pulse her probe had first detected. And as they entered the structure, each step down the smooth, glowing stairs made them feel smaller, as if the walls were pressing in with ancient weight. And when they reached the lowest chamber, a stasis pod stood in the center, its surface lined with unknown glyphs, its energy levels impossibly steady, and inside it, suspended like a dream frozen in time, was a human, pale-skinned, strong-featured, older than any human they had ever seen, and yet still very much alive. And Captain Mara cursed under her breath, for no records placed humans this far out, let alone in the ruins of the ancients, and Kirel was speechless, staring at the readings that confirmed the impossible this being had been sleeping for thousands of years. Long before human spaceflight was even recorded, long before Earth had joined the stars. And as the others argued about what to do, whether to wake him or leave, the decision was taken from them, for the pod began to unlock on its own, responding to their presence, or perhaps to time itself. The crystal cover folded away, the lights dimmed, and a figure inside stirred, opening his eyes with slow awareness. And in that moment, Kirel felt the air shift, as if gravity itself remembered a name it had forgotten, and the man sat up, calm, focused, his eyes sharp and cold, scanning each face in the room before speaking in a voice rough with sleep, but filled with something heavy experience, perhaps, or memory as, he said only 4 words. How long has passed? And though they answered him, told him it had been over 12 millennia since the coordinates on the pod had been active, his face darkened not with fear, but with realization, and he stood without help, stronger than anyone expected, walking across the chamber like a king in a forgotten throne room, running his hand along the walls, murmuring softly in a language no translator could parse. And when he turned back, his expression was grim, tired, and utterly serious as he said, "You should not have come here." And before they could respond, the room shook slightly, as if something far below had heard him, something ancient and still waiting. And the temperature dropped by several degrees, frost curling along the edges of the pod, and Corell felt her instincts scream to leave, but her curiosity held her in place, and she asked who he was, what he was, and he gave her a long look, then said, "I am Elias Ventari, last of the Vanguard." And none of them knew what that meant, but it felt important, like a piece of history snapping into place. And when they tried to contact the ship, their comms were full of static, and then a new signal broke through, not from the radiant dust, but from orbit, from something massive, unidentified, and growing closer, broadcasting an energy signature that matched the ruins. Not any modern fleet, and Nilo's eyes glowed with alarm as he processed the data and whispered, "It's ancient, but there's no crew." And Elias looked skyward with a hollow gaze, saying, "They found us too soon." And though the crew had more questions than answers, none of them doubted now that the myths were real, that the ancients were not some vanished race of aliens, but humans, powerful, ancient, and feared for a reason. And whatever had scared the galaxy into silence was waking up again. And Elias, their only link to that long-lost age, might be the only one who knew what was truly coming. The silence in the chamber was heavy after Elias spoke his name, and no one knew what to say next, not even Kiro, who had dreamed of discovering answers, but now stood face to face with a man who belonged to a forgotten past. And as Elias stepped away from the stasis pod, the glowing runes across the walls flickered like they were reacting to his presence, humming with energy that had been asleep for thousands of years. And though the crew didn't understand the symbols, Elias did, tracing them with his fingers, eyes scanning the text like reading a book written yesterday, while the others exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to trust him, afraid yet fascinated. And up above, the unknown ship remained in silent orbit, motionless but present, its energy signals unlike anything recorded, as if waiting, watching, or perhaps remembering. And Corell tried to speak calmly, asking Elias where he came from, how he ended up here, and he turned to her slowly, his voice low but clear, saying he had been one of the Vanguard, a group of humans, chosen to sleep beneath the stars to watch over the galaxy in case the enemy returned. And when Mara asked what enemy, his expression grew cold, and he said it had no name, only hunger, and that it once threatened to consume all living systems. And though they had defeated it, they had never destroyed it, only sealed it. And the ruins left behind were not temples, they were prisons and warning signs. And now something had disturbed the seal, something or someone, and the old defenses had failed. And when Corell asked how he knew, he pointed upward to the ship in orbit and said it was a beacon ship programmed to wake him if the enemy's signals returned. And now that it had appeared, it meant the seals were breaking again. And before they could absorb the weight of his words, the chamber lights dimmed and a deep sound echoed through the walls. Not from machines, but from something older, a vibration deep in the stone like a heartbeat. And Elias frowned, placing his hand on the wall and whispering words none of them could translate. And the humming ceased, the light stabilized, and the threat passed for now. And Tech, who had remained quiet until now, asked if this meant the galaxy was in danger again. And Elias answered without emotion, saying yes, but this time there was no human empire left to fight it, no ancient fleet, only scattered peoples who had forgotten the cost of the last war. And Corell insisted they had to warn the Concord, but Elias shook his head, saying they wouldn't believe them, not without proof, and the enemy would move in secret, just like before, taking systems one by one until it was too late. And that was why he needed to reach the old networks, the relay cores hidden across ancient vaults, to awaken the knowledge lost and the defenses buried. And when they returned to the radiant dust, the systems were still glitching, but the ship was unharmed. And as soon as Elias stepped aboard, the controls lit up brighter than before, responding to his genetic code. And Nilo watched in awe as Elias guided the ship with gestures alone, pulling up star maps no one knew existed, showing routes through systems marked as dead or uninhabited. And Elias explained that long ago, humans had created hidden paths, silent jump relays buried in black holes and stars far from the eyes of younger races, and these would lead them to the forgotten vaults. But the enemy would be watching, and already Elias sensed its probes awakening. Shadows in the dark between systems, and as they prepared to leave orbit, the beacon ship above began to move. Slowly at first, then with strange precision, aligning itself with the radiant dust, and Kiro feared it might attack, but Elias told them to hold steady. And he spoke in a language none of them understood, voice calm and sure, and in response, the beacon ship transmitted something, not words, but a map, a stream of coordinates stretching across the stars, with each point glowing faintly like candles in a sea of black. And Elias said it was the network's last whisper, a signal from the ancient web of sentinels that once guarded the galaxy, now barely functional, but still trying to help. And with that, the beacon ship powered down and drifted back into silence, like a machine waiting to die, and Elias set a course to the first point on the map, a hidden facility on a moon long thought uninhabitable. But as they left orbit, strange energy spikes flared across nearby space, faint but increasing, and Elias grew tense, telling them the enemy had noticed the activation, and the race had begun. And Kirel sat in her chair, heart racing, wondering how it had come to this. How a mission meant to study ancient ruins had become a fight for the future. And as the stars streaked past the window, she thought about how many species had feared the ancients, had called them gods or monsters, when all along they had been human, silent guardians, waiting in the dark for the time to return. And that time, it seemed, had come. The stars outside the ship were calm, but inside the radiant dust, tension ran like a quiet storm as Elias guided them toward the coordinates given by the beacon ship. The map lighting up before him with markers only he could understand. Each one a forgotten place tied to a history no one else remembered. And while Kirill studied the energy readings and tried to keep her nerves steady, Captain Mara watched Elias carefully, her instincts on edge, unsure whether to trust a man who had lived long before her ancestors were born. And Nilo recorded every word, fascinated by the strange human who seemed more like a relic than a person, yet moved through the ship like he belonged to it. And Tech, the Zarn pilot, followed Ilias's path with quiet respect, recognizing a leader, even if he didn't fully believe the stories. And as they dropped out of warp near the cold, gray moon of Ralostan, a dead rock orbiting a forgotten gas giant, the crew saw the first signs of something unnatural, a field of debris floating in silence, pieces of ancient metal and shattered stations, some still faintly powered by long-dead cores. And in the middle of it all, a strange structure half buried in the ice, shaped like a massive eye, unmoving but clearly artificial. And Elias confirmed it was the first relay, a place where knowledge had once been stored, where signals from the other vaults had passed through a central AI system, but now it was quiet, the surface coated in centuries of frost. And as they landed on a flat platform nearby, the ground trembled slightly beneath their feet, not from motion, but from memory, as if the very moon recognized who had come. And when Elias stepped forward, the frost began to melt where he walked, exposing old metal and glowing blue lines beneath the ice. And the entrance opened with a slow hiss, not by command, but by recognition. And inside, the air was heavy, filled with dust and silence, broken only by the soft hum of dormant machines waking up one by one, and the walls lit up with symbols none of the crew could read, except Elias, who moved without hesitation deeper into the heart of the vault, stopping at a large sphere suspended in midair. Its surface cracked, but pulsing faintly, and he placed his hand on it, eyes closing, and for a moment nothing happened. Then suddenly the room filled with projections, smidges of ancient battles, fleets made of light, planets shrouded in black storms, and strange creatures with burning eyes made not of flesh but metal, swarming across systems like a plague. And the crew stood frozen as they watched the final moments of a forgotten war. The collapse of the last human bastions, the sealing of the enemy in distant places marked only by starless voids, and Elias whispered, "The Selner Swarm." The name rolling off his tongue like an old scar being touched. And Curiel asked if they were truly back, and he nodded slowly, saying he could feel their signals rising again, faint at first, but growing, spreading like they once did. And now that the relay was awake, the enemy would know, and they would come. Not with fleets at first, but with infiltration, silent probes, AI shadows, machines that replaced minds, and hollowed worlds without warning. And suddenly, the sphere flickered, its glow dimming, and a voice filled the room, broken and fading, calling Elias by name, saying, "Vanguard Protocol, reactivate, sequence, incomplete, breach detected," and the walls shook slightly as red lights lit up. And Elias turned quickly, eyes sharp, saying they had to leave, now, 'cause the enemy had sent something already, a hunter drone, designed to destroy relay cores before they could be reactivated. And as they ran back through the halls, the lights behind them began to fail, one by one. And a new sound echoed through the structure, a clicking, mechanical scrape that grew louder with each passing moment. And just before they reached the exit, something moved in the shadows, a shape with too many limbs and eyes like red stars. And Mara fired her pulse weapon, but it barely slowed the thing down, and Elias pushed her aside, raising his hand, triggering a pulse from his wristband that lit up with golden energy. And the creature screamed a sound like metal tearing and staggered back, long enough for them to reach the ship. And as they took off, the vault collapsed behind them, an energy surge from the dying relay consuming the entrance. And the drone vanished in the explosion, but the damage had been done. And Elias looked out at the stars, his face grim, saying that every relay they tried to wake would be hunted. And time was running out, and Curiel sat down slowly, staring at her hands, realizing that this wasn't just about history anymore, it was about survival. And Elias, the last of the ancients, was their only guide through the storm that was coming. And as the ship jumped to the next coordinate, a second shadow passed across a nearby asteroid belt, another drone, watching, waiting, ready to follow. The stars looked peaceful as the radiant dust soared through the dark void. But inside the ship, the crew felt the weight of what they had seen, what they had learned, and what they now faced. For the enemy Elias called the Selner Swarm was real, live, and waking faster than expected. And though the first vault had given them pieces of the truth, it had also alerted the swarm to their mission. And Elias knew they had to move quickly before the next relay fell to the machines. So he led them to a system hidden behind a dying sun, where an artificial asteroid drifted unnoticed by most travelers. And there, deep within its rocky core, was a second vault, smaller than the last, but still active, its outer surface marked with human codes from a time before the galaxy had memory. And as they entered the vault, it welcomed Elias with soft blue lights and silent doors that opened at his touch. recognizing his DNA, his voice, even the rhythm of his heartbeat, and Kirill watched in awe, recording everything while Nilo scanned the walls and ceilings, storing the data in his memory banks, trying to understand how humans had once built such wonders. And when they reached the central chamber, Elias approached another sphere, this one intact and glowing more brightly, and he placed both hands on it, closing his eyes as the vault linked to his mind, showing visions to them, all visions not of war, but of peace, of an empire not driven by conquest, but by purpose, where humanity had risen not as tyrants, but as protectors, spreading across the stars to hold back the darkness that hunted all life. And they saw images of ancient councils, of fleets made from starlight, of worlds united under a single goal to survive what lurked beyond the edges of known space. And Kirill realized then that the ancients had not vanished out of pride or weakness, but because they chose to burn their own future to seal away the swarm, sacrificing everything so that younger races could rise in a safer galaxy. And the galaxy, in its ignorance, had turned their memory into fear, calling them gods or demons, when in truth they had only been human, brilliant, flawed, determined humans. And Elias spoke quietly as the images faded, saying that the war had not ended, only paused. And the cost of that pause had been silence, myths, and buried knowledge. And now the silence was breaking, and the enemy would return stronger, smarter, no longer limited by the walls the ancients had built. In the younger species, Kirill's people, Tech's people, even Earth's current generation were not ready, not united, not prepared for what was coming. And Mara asked why Elias hadn't just gone to the Concord directly, warned them all at once, and he said they wouldn't listen, not without proof, and even with proof, fear would turn them against each other, against him. And that was how the swarm won, by division, by doubt, by turning the living into weapons against themselves. And suddenly the sphere dimmed, the room flickered, and a projection filled the air this time. Not ancient, but recent, a star map with blinking red points spreading like infection marks across sectors, and Elias recognized them as colonies going silent. One by one, systems once peaceful, now lost to unknown causes. And it was clear the swarm was already at work, moving in shadows, erasing life quietly, and he told them they had to find the core beacon, the master key that would unlock the final protocols, the last defense systems still hidden across the galaxy. The location of the beacon had been removed from the vaults long ago, stored only in one place, the original archive, buried deep beneath Earth itself, the homeworld now forgotten by most. A green and blue planet lost in old maps, overgrown and unclaimed, too wild for settlers, too sacred for explorers. And Kirill's heart jumped as she realized the truth, that humanity had not only survived in myths, but had returned as a young race, unaware of its ancient legacy, and Earth was not just their origin, but the last hiding place of their greatest secret. And Elias confirmed it with a slow nod, saying the swarm would likely discover this too. And soon, and they had to reach Earth before it was too late, before the past was buried again, this time forever. And as they returned to the ship, the vault sealed itself behind them, its purpose complete, and far behind them, sensors picked up a faint trace of shadow following their path, another hunter probe, drifting, silent, and cold, tracking their jumps, waiting for them to stop. And Elias looked at the map one last time before plotting a course home, whispering to himself that maybe, just maybe, there was still hope in the stars. The journey to Earth felt longer than any they had taken, even though the stars passed quickly outside the ship's windows, because this time they were not flying toward an unknown ruin or forgotten vault, but toward the place where it all began, the place that once birthed a mighty people who ruled the stars and then vanished in silence. Canned, as the radiant dust approached the Sol system, The crew grew quiet, each one sensing the weight of what was ahead. And when the blue and green planet finally appeared on the screen, turning slowly under the light of its sun, it looked peaceful, untouched by war, covered in wild forests, deep oceans, and scattered ruins overgrown by time. But Elias knew better, knew what lay beneath that calm surface. 4 deep under the mountains of old Europe was a hidden chamber sealed by codes older than any living civilization. A place where the final beacon had been hidden before the last battle, when humanity had scattered and slept. And as they entered Earth's atmosphere, the ship shook gently, not from resistance, but from ancient warning systems still partially active. And Elias entered a forgotten clearance code that silenced the alerts and opened a flight path through the sky, guiding them to a remote mountain range covered in thick clouds and heavy snowfall. And as they landed near a frozen cliff, Kirel felt a strange pull in her chest, a feeling like memory without words, as if the planet itself remembered who she was or who Elias was. And when they stepped outside, the cold wind howled, but the ground trembled slightly beneath their feet. And Elias walked forward slowly, scanning the mountainside until he stopped before what looked like an ordinary wall of stone, then pressed his hand to the rock, speaking a single word in a language that vibrated through the air like a song. And the wall shimmered, faded, and revealed a black doorway leading into darkness. And without a word, he stepped inside, followed by the others, lights flickering on as they moved deeper, the air growing warmer with each step, until they reached a vast chamber lined with glowing walls and pillars covered in writing. And at the center stood the beacon, a tall structure of crystal and metal, shaped like a flame, frozen in time, pulsing softly with blue light. And Elias approached it with slow reverence, casing his hand upon its surface as the chamber came alive, showing holograms of the ancient galaxy, the fall of human worlds, the sealing of the swarm. And then quiet, till now, and the beacon spoke, not in words, but in thoughts, sending pulses into Elias's mind, unlocking every sealed memory he had left. And he gasped, falling to his knees, gripping the beacon as if it were the only thing keeping him from drifting away. And the crew rushed to him, but he held up a hand, eyes shut, breathing hard, until finally he stood and said that he remembered everything now, just the battles, or the mission, but the names, the lives, the families they left behind, and most importantly, the location of the final defense systems, hidden in places no longer marked on modern maps, still powered by ancient stars and guarded by old AI that would only respond to the beacon's activation. And just as they prepared to transmit the signal, the chamber lights flickered and dimmed, and the beacon pulsed red for a moment, warning of an approaching threat. And Elias's face went cold as he realized what it meant. The swarm had followed them, not just to Earth, but into the beacon chamber itself, using the same clearance codes they had intercepted during the last vault. And suddenly, the walls cracked as a black machine burst through the far side, its body sleek and sharp, made of shifting metal and red light, with no eyes, no mouth, just weapons and purpose. And Mara fired first, her shots ricocheting off its armor, while Nilo tried to overload its sensors with pulses. And Tech took position near the entrance, holding back smaller drones now pouring in like insects. And Elias, breathing hard, reached deep into the beacon's controls, speaking commands only he could know. And the beacon responded by releasing a shockwave of energy that slowed the drones, freezing some in midair, but it would not hold long. And Elias shouted for Kirel to help him channel the signal. Her mind, trained to read energy flows, was the only one capable of stabilizing the transmission while he opened the final key. And together they focused, pouring thought into light until the beacon glowed white, brighter than a star, and sent a pulse that reached beyond Earth, beyond the system, to the far corners of the galaxy, waking ancient satellites, deep core defense towers, and hidden fleets that had waited in silence for a single command to rise again. And the drones screeched as they began to melt under the beacon's energy, falling like ash to the floor. But the largest machine lunged forward one last time, its arm forming a blade of red light aimed at Elias, and Mara stepped in its path. Shield raised, taking the hit with a cry, falling hard. Tyus caught her before she hit the ground, eyes wide with grief and rage, and, with a final word, he activated the chamber's failsafe, causing the entire mountain to shake its defense. Turrets dropped from the ceiling and vaporized the last of the enemy. And when the silence returned, only the hum of the beacon remained, steady and calm. Curel helped Elias carry Mara back to the ship, wounded but alive, and as they took off into the sky, Earth slowly faded behind them, but the stars ahead now pulsed with the light not from danger, but from hope, as signals answered across sectors, the old defenses waking once more, the last beacon now shining in the dark. And Elias looked out at the galaxy and whispered, "We are not too late. Not yet." The stars glowed brighter now as the radiant dust flew through open space, its hull still marked with the scars of battle, but inside, the crew moved with a new sense of purpose, because the beacon on Earth had awakened the old defense network. And across the galaxy, systems once silent were now lighting up with ancient signals, weapons built before time, and names were coming online. Hidden fleets long buried beneath forgotten moons were rising, and the last hope of stopping the Selna swarm had begun to return. But Elias knew this was only the beginning, because the swarm would not run, would not retreat, and now that the beacon had been activated, it would attack with everything it had. And so he sat quietly at the ship's console, eyes closed, mind connected to the pulse of the awakened network, feeling the flow of signals, the movement of ships, the flicker of old codes remembering their purpose. And though he had seen much, lost more, and lived far beyond what any human should, he felt no fear, only duty. And beside him, Corell studied the new data pouring in, watching red markers blink on the galactic map like drops of blood, each one a world under attack, a station going dark, a colony falling silent. And she turned to Elias and asked if it would be enough, if the defenses would hold. And he said quietly that it would depend on what they did next, because the defenses were tools, not answers. And what the galaxy needed now was unity, not just from the old weapons, but from the living species who had risen in the ancients' place. And so they made a decision not to run, not to hide, but to reveal the truth to the galactic concord, even if it caused panic, even if they were rejected, because the time for secrets was over, and the swarm would not wait. So they flew toward the Concord capital, a massive space station orbiting a blue sun, where leaders of over 70 species gathered to make decisions for 1,000,000 worlds. And when the radiant dust arrived, the station's security systems lit up with warnings, patrol ships surrounding them, demanding to know why an unregistered ship was approaching at such speed. And Curel, her voice steady, sent a message directly to the High Council, stating they carried a representative of the ancients and had information critical to the survival of the galaxy. And, for a long moment, there was only silence until the ships pulled back slightly and an escort opened a path, leading them to the heart of the station, where 1,000 eyes watched. As Elias stepped onto the landing platform, dressed in simple black, but walking with the weight of forgotten empires in every step, and some whispered in shock. Some called it a lie, but when he spoke, the chamber grew silent, because he did not speak in arrogance, nor did he command respect. He simply told them the truth, showed them what they had seen, the vaults, the relays, the beacon, and the rise of the swarm. And though many were afraid, and some accused him of deception, the evidence was clear. And when the lights dimmed and a new signal filled the chamber, an ancient distress call from a world under attack in the Orion Verge. One not broadcast in 10,000 years. None could deny the truth any longer. K, divided for so long, voted to act, not in fear, but in unity, for the first time in generations, and across the galaxy. Fleets began to move, stations were armed, alliances were formed, and the defense protocols Elias had triggered started linking with modern systems, blending old and new. And the swarm, now fully awake, struck fast, attacking with precision, sending machines that tore through planets like storms, replacing life with silence. But they met resistance, strong, united, ancient, and when the first line of defense held, Elias stood on the bridge of the old human command ship, now reactivated, watching the stars and knowing that the ancients had truly returned. Not through force, but through the living, through those who chose to stand together. And though the war was far from over, the darkness no longer spread unopposed, and Corel, looking out at the stars beside him, asked what came next, and Elias smiled faintly. It's the first real smile she had seen on him, and said, "Now we fight not to survive, but to live." And the stars seemed to shine brighter, as if remembering too that long ago, humanity had stood between light and shadow, and they had returned not to rule, but to protect again, and this time they would not be forgotten.